Iain Duncan Smith, former Conservative leader, of course. I'm just wondering, the nightclub industry says that ministers just don't care about them. And looking at this, you do wonder the thinking behind it.
Well, I have some sympathy for them, really, because I'm not sure this has been thought through very well. Let me give you an example. So they're now saying to nightclub owners, which they didn't before, so there was no plan made, that they have to check to see whether people have had 2 vaccinations. But they're now going to have to wait anyway until later on, I think in September, isn't it, before they finally implement all of that. And then they're saying health staff don't need to self-isolate because they've had 2 jabs. But, I've had 2 jabs. And they're saying, well, actually, then everybody else has got to wait till August the 16th before we say that they don't have to self-isolate. And my argument is, well, people like me have had 2 jabs, so what's going to change between now and the August the 16th? And the reality is nothing. So it's a bit of a mess, I'm afraid. That's my concern.
Seems to me, and I don't know if you agree with me saying this, but the government at the moment seems to be tinkering around the edges to try and control the situation, try and stick to Freedom Day as much as possible, but, decide which bits they don't care about to throw on the bonfire. And again, it seems to be younger people bearing the brunt. Is that because the Conservative Party just discard them as potential voters?
No, I don't. I think it really hasn't got. I don't think it's even been thought through that well. I think what's going on here is that since they announced, what they call Freedom Day, and then had to delay it by a month, and then they're at Freedom Day this week. In the meantime, some scientists have just been pounding the hell out of them with all sorts of forecasts. Goodness gracious, we've had so many forecasts from scientists that are completely wrong. And this has got them, I think, a bit jittery about it. And then at the last, there were these scenes or something of people dancing in a nightclub, and suddenly they got spooked because scientists are saying this will be terrible. So they've then decided they're going to modify that. Trouble is, when you make these last-minute changes, it's very difficult as a business to make any arrangements. So it wasn't really planned. If it was planned, they'd have said, anyone in a nightclub will have to have COVID double jab passports from day one, but they didn't say that, which is why there's now a delay. So I'm afraid it's more a case of last-minute reaction on witnessing scenes inside a nightclub, which has caused them to get spooked by it all, because scientists are telling them if this goes on, they'll all get COVID. In fact, the big surge in COVID at the moment, infection rate, not in hospitalizations, is actually amongst 60 to 24-year-olds who are less likely to have been vaccinated. But, if you've been vaccinated, you're okay.
To some extent, the Prime Minister is damned if he does, damned if he doesn't, on whatever he decides to do. No one would want to be in his position. But if you add it all together and then you throw in what Dominic Cummings has said in the last 24 hours, you get the impression of a Prime Minister who doesn't really have a grip on this at all.
Well, let's again, I keep saying to everybody, get these things in context. First of all, no government since the Second World War has been hit by this kind of scale of a crisis last year. Nobody. So everyone's been learning on the job from day one. And even the health department has been learning, and doctors and nurses have been learning, because the way they treat patients now is quite different from the way they treated them a year ago. So everybody has had to learn what works and to get those lessons right. And making decisions about these things is not an exact science. I don't have a lot of time for Dominic Cummings' utterances. He's clearly very bitter and angry for no longer being in his job and wants to take it out on the Prime Minister. I have no idea what took place at these meetings, but to throw a text up, isolated from any context, does seem to me to be very, very easily read as the act of a person who wants to make it as dangerous and as difficult for the Prime Minister as possible. But I always ask, what's the context of that? When you're making decisions in government, or I've had to make them when I was in the army and to service and things like that, you have to make decisions, and you sometimes argue and row about these things because you're trying to get the balance of risk right in the decision you take. So to just isolate one statement, which in actual fact, if you look at it, is all about who are we protecting and who are we not protecting, who do we need to lock down and who don't we? And these things can often get quite fractious as you're trying desperately to get the decision right. On the balance, on the one hand, keeping jobs going and businesses going, and also keeping people's mental health right by allowing them to go out. On the other hand, concerns about the then spread and no vaccines yet at that point. So all of these things are fraught. I have to say I don't really hang on the Dominic Cummings interpretation of almost anything, I think.
You wouldn't be the only one. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one to sometimes question. We've had so many unprecedented infringements on our personal liberties because of the pandemic. I think a lot of people accept that it's a very unique circumstance. But we now know things like the emergency, COVID legislation is likely to be extended in September, meaning the government can hang on to the big red lockdown button over winter. And I'm certainly worried about what sort of precedent are we setting now? Is this going to be permanent, this authoritarian creep? Are we ever going to get our lives back to normal? And if so, does legislation essentially need to be rescinded and cancelled to do that?
Well, I share your concerns. That's one of myself and others have been saying, that it's not esoteric to want to have the whole issue of rules, regulations and laws over this rebalanced and returned to very much the judgment of individuals. And that's where the problem arises. It's very tempting for governments, just in case, to keep hold of all sorts of regulations and laws. In actual fact, my view is you should be getting rid of them as quickly as you can. And this is really where the whole debate at the moment centers around unlocking and not unlocking. You know, there's been a kind of Project Fear to try and get people to obey the original lockdowns, which has been banging on. Since then, outlets like the BBC publish these figures all the time without any context or explaining what this is all about. And as people are actually, the majority of people are on furlough, a lot aren't, and a lot are watching their businesses go to the wall. But those who are on furlough, if you ask them the question, which would they prefer, they'll probably pick furlough because it means they're not having to go to work and they don't feel there's any risk. But, you know, we have to learn to live with risk because risk is what we do all our lives. You know, we choose to cross the road without a zebra crossing. Some people ride on motorcycles, increasing their risk. Bicycles are a more risky option than driving in a car, and so on and so forth. So you make the balance on the basis of what your choices are. That's what we do. What we're now beginning to get to is that we can't take that balance of risks, and there is only one risk, and we must stop it, and we'll never stop it. So we have to try and re-educate everybody that we've got to get those freedoms back because they are who we are. Otherwise, we'll end up like China, where your every movement is tracked, your every purchase is tracked, everyone you meet is tracked, where you've gone, when you've gone, how much you've spent, how long you stayed there. All that sort of stuff is now tracked by technology. I'm not of that, I'm afraid. As I say, you'll never know what it got till it's been taken away from you. And we are in serious danger of losing some of this for good. So let's get back to freedom.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.